Welcome, everyone. My name is Amy Christensen. I'm your stand-in moderator today, and I'm very pleased to have the honor to be on stage with this incredible panel of folks who are dedicated to saving the world from us, strategies for conservation. And I think we don't really need to get into how bad things are right now. A lot of us are very aware of what's happening to the world around us because of our activities. And so what I want to dive into immediately with this panel is talk about what are those interventions that we can make that can stem this tide, that can really start turning things around. Where are we seeing successes across the conservation field? And how do we also engage more people in this effort and inspire them by some of those successes we're seeing? And so on that note, I thought I might start with our first panelist, Catherine Bigelow, to inspire and inform us in her way of doing so, which is through video, through media. And so we'll start with our opening video that Catherine directed. Award-winning producer, director, Catherine Bigelow, as you know, I'm sure, The Hurt Locker, Zero Dark 30. So thank you, Catherine, for joining us and doing this for us.
Thank you.
All right.
So okay, good. It's short.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for watching it.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing your skills and talent to this issue, but why this issue? Why now?
Well, I came across this information of the kind of, how do you want to say, the matrix of intersection between terrorism and elephant poaching, and I realized that this was information, it didn't seem to be readily available or perhaps out there in the civilian sector because it was very difficult to get my hands on, and decided that this was worthy of making something to kind of explore it and express it. But I couldn't do it in anything other than animation because I can't look at images of an animal suffering. So it had to be animated, even though it wasn't my métier. I'm much better with live action. But put some people together, and it took about a year. It was all pro bono. We were working like, in odd hours because everybody had day jobs. But it was so meaningful to everybody, and I thought it was an important message to get out there and look at, like for instance, these this poaching. I mean, there are people that are, educated adults who don't realize that elephants, these are not milk teeth that just fall out. These elephants, each and every one is killed, their faces are hacked off, and then the ivory is sold, and usually to buy weapons, and it's funding these nefarious activities in a lot of these groups, especially Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, Lord's Resistance, as we said there. And so, but this is a finite resource. We really only have a few years left of elephants in the wild. So that was my reason for making it. And now I'm very fortunate to be here talking to you and talking to all of you in the panel and just trying to, I guess my kind of mantra is, an elephant is killed every 15 minutes. My hope would be to create an activist every 15 minutes. And there are things that can be done, something that both Greg and I will be talking about, like trying to get equipment to the rangers in these sort of supply zones, these transit hubs in between Sudan and South Sudan, where they're inaccessible. I don't want to go on too long because I want everybody else to speak, but they're really inaccessible by road. They're only able to be accessed by foot, and this is where a majority of like trafficking of all different elements, human trafficking, weapons, and of course endangered species are trafficked there and then shipped to various places around the world. And we have only a finite resource. Mm-hmm. And so my hope would be to try to empower the rangers who are there to try to stop it. They need equipment. The poachers have night vision goggles, they have helicopters, they have 50 caliber weapons. And my hope would be to give these rangers not just the equipment, but the kind of moral authority to have, to be able to rise up against this, horrible situation and kind of heroize them, I suppose. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of my hope.
Well, Greg, so building on that, how is the Enough project? I mean, when I think of Enough, I think of the work on human trafficking and some of these illicit activities. I hadn't realized about the connection to your work to conservation. So yeah. How do we get the resources we need to the rangers, and what is that direct connection on the ground?
Well, I mean, what's so amazing about Catherine's film, and I think it's groundbreaking actually, to talk about the loss of elephants as a tragedy, but also to make the connection that there's a human toll, a significant human toll in the poaching of ivory, the trafficking of ivory. We work on preventing atrocities, and often we're working to combat groups like the Lord's Resistance Army. Many of you may be familiar with Joseph Kony campaign. So Joseph Kony is the leader of the LRA, notorious for abducting children and forcing to be soldiers and sex slaves. Over 66,000 children abducted by the LRA during the course of their reign. Today, the LRA's main source of funding is ivory. So we're seeing a convergence between groups that are concerned about human rights and international security, that's a designated terrorist organization, and people who care about the beauty and bounty of our planet and our fellow species. And I think that there are many things that people can do to engage and play a role. Every one of you listening today has a potential role to play in protecting elephants and protecting the people who are harmed in the trafficking of ivory. I think that capacitizing rangers is critical. It's critical, and it's something that we're very much focused on. Also, looking at the whole supply chain and going up the value chain, because increasingly we're seeing trafficking and poaching as a vertically integrated criminal enterprise, highly financed. We're seeing people flying into Garamba National Park in Democratic Republic of Congo, shooting elephants out of helicopters and taking them out in one shot. These are very sophisticated networks and systems. They're able to take out multiple elephants, whereas years ago, a poaching group would maybe take out one elephant at a time. 8, 10, and more are wiped out in a single hunting spree. So again, I think if someone wanted to, in this audience, buy a helicopter for the rangers, like Warren Buffett just did for the rangers in Garamba National Park, there are very concrete and specific things that we can do to make a huge difference right now.
Thank you. David, I wanted to turn to you because you've been focused. David Bonderman, the founder of TPG, longtime, very successful private equity firm. But your philanthropy is where, over the years of working in conservation, I've known of your leadership. And I know now that you're focused on anti-poaching efforts. I was wondering who you're working with and what are you seeing as some of the interventions that are working there?
We work in exactly the places that Greg was just talking about and that Kath has shown. We have something called the Wildcat Foundation. 100% of what it does is anti-poaching in Africa. We have projects in 7 or 8 different countries, and it's a war out there. And some of the things that Greg is talking about is exactly what we do. In Garamba National Park, where my wife Lori and I were about 3 weeks ago, just in time to see the AFRICOM, the U.S. guys from AFRICOM come over because of the Lord's Resistance Army there, a unit which has since been wiped out. But these are real hot wars. And so what we have been willing to do is what most NGOs won't, which is we'll buy weapons where it's legal. We buy night vision goggles. We build jails. We train judges, because half the problem is arresting and stopping poachers. Half of them is, and the one way to do that is to keep them in jail. There's so much money that floats around in the ivory trade that people are easily able to bribe their way out of convictions, bribe their way out of jails. We have a project, for example, in Congo-Brazzaville, in the northern end of Congo-Brazzaville, where they were able to arrest poachers, but they had nowhere to put them, so they let them go. So we've now paid for transportation, so they'll take them down to the Congo, to the capital in Brazzaville. It's the kind of stuff you have to do. And just so guys in the audience, if you haven't seen, you think what Catherine is doing is overly dramatic. It's not overly dramatic. In Virunga National Park, which is in eastern Congo, and in fact, there's been a documentary made about what's going on there, and was nominated for an Oscar. It didn't win, but it's around. It's called Virunga. Virunga National Park has about 550 rangers, and they've lost, of that number, they've lost about 132 deaths in armed conflicts with various militias, of which there are several, and the Congolese army. In Garamba National Park, which Greg was referring to, when we were there a few weeks ago, there was an encampment of the Lord's Resistance Army right in the middle of the park. That group was taken on, but you have to facilitate things because these people, as Greg said, these people are well armed. Mainly Somalis and Sudanese are the poachers. Mainly Chinese are the buyers. Ultimately, you won't solve this without getting the Chinese government to crack down on the ivory trade. Most of the ivory goes to carving houses in China, which are all owned by the state governments. And so there's lots of work to be done there. But that work takes time, and what you need is something now, because something like 90% of all the elephants that existed 40 years ago have been killed. And while some people think it might be in 10 or 11 years, some people think it might be 4 or 5 years at the rate poaching is happening, where there are no more elephants in the wild. So you have to be willing to take fairly extreme measures. In Nyassa National Park, we got them a helicopter. In Garamba, we got them 2 airplanes. Night vision goggles are important. But one of the big problems that you have is the unwillingness of many African governments to actually take on the poachers, in part because they're often corrupt. Tanzania is particularly corrupt. Kenya is much better. Rwanda is not corrupt at all, so it depends on where. And some of the best programs have been done in places where, with people who you might not love as great Democrats. And in fact, we were in Chad on this trip, and Chad has lost about 90% of its elephants, but they've now sent in the army in Zakuma National Park, and they haven't lost an elephant now in 3 years. There used to be 15,000, they're now 500, but they haven't lost any in 3 years because they have a well-run armed force, and the whole park is managed by somebody called the African Parks Network from Johannesburg, who are by far the most effective environmental organization in Africa on anti-poaching. And their business model is they sign a long-term deal with the relevant government, and that government lets them run the national park, including hiring, firing, training, importing weapons, using helicopters, and that works. Lesser things do not work. So this is a work in progress, and we put all of our financing might behind that. But you have to be careful because on the ground it's easy to have your equipment get stolen. It's easy to have poorly trained people. Many governments are afraid of arming their own rangers because they're worried that, given the history of civil wars and what have you, that the arms will be used against them. So it's an uphill battle. And there's some countries, and Tanzania is one of them, which has historically refused to allow any outsiders to manage any of their national parks. The result is they're managed corruptly and incompetently, whereas Kenya and Uganda have been much better. So you work where you can.
Is there a role for the government? I'm just curious. I mean, is there a role for the U.S. government to help open up those opportunities to work with places like Tanzania? I mean, we were even talking earlier about additional sanctions, criminal penalties. I'd love to talk about New York and what their role can be given their market for ivory. But I'm curious about, is there a role for the U.S. government in this?
The answer is yes. The U.S. government is spending about $50 million a year now, partially through USAID, which is completely incompetent, and all money given to the USAID is wasted. And the Fish and Wildlife Service, who's actually quite good, and there's been some internal warfare in the U.S. government about taking this $50 to $80 million and who gets it, which agency gets what. Historically, it's all been done by the USAID guys and wasted. Now, Fish and Wildlife has taken over much of it, and they're doing a much better job. And actually, Tanzania is sort of the bellwether for this because, going back to your question, the current ambassador, who is an unlikely ambassador or a candidate because he came out of the Obama White House where he was deputy chief of staff, and therefore is more politically savvy and willing to take positions that most diplomats won't. He's done Mark Childress is his name, he's done a fabulous job in Tanzania. Getting to the point of being able to have a personal relationship with the president and actually having some things done in a non-corrupt way for the very first time in Tanzania. So yes, the U.S. government does have a role.
Great. So Catherine, I'm curious, you have had some conversations with New York State government about some of the penalties and how do we help stem the tide in that way, so directly going after the criminals who are importing the illegal goods. Can you just share a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, it was a real surprise to me that New York is the second biggest market out of China in the world. And I recently had a couple of conversations with the assistant district attorney and the district attorney of New York. And you know, with the advent of terrorism being a factor and national security then obviously being a factor, that they are looking into trying to up the felony, up the alphabetical chain. It was an E felony to be in possession of illegal ivory. Now it's an F felony, Schedule F, and they would like it to be Schedule C. How that happens is you really have to kind of talk to your constituents and, you know, make some noise, and then they will hopefully react. And they also would like to get more investigators for all of New York. all of the boroughs, there's only 3 investigators. And literally there are tables of ivory in the jewelry district out in the stores. I mean, it's out, it's visible. And so they're certainly on it. It's just trying to, I guess, move the logistics in their favor.
Well, and by raising awareness, getting people to call on changes to this, and understanding that connection to terrorism, I think is powerful, hopefully to help make some of these changes happen.
It certainly made the conversation louder.
Great.
Sadly.
Yes. So Tom, longtime investor in mining, and now really focused on saving big cats. So tell me about that transition. Tell me about your passion, where it came from. This is a longtime passion of yours to save big cats, but some people might wonder, if going from successful mining investor and now entirely focused on big cats is a real purpose in your life. I would love to hear that story, and why them as a strategic intervention for conservation beyond the conversation we've been having around the poaching issue.
Beautiful, thank you. If I could call up the slides. I only have a few, and effectively they're pictures rather than a lot of text. First of all, thank you very much for having me on the panel. The truth is that I viewed my vocation as having been very much an accident, a very fortuitous accident. But my great passion in life from the time when I was a boy was big cats. And my aspiration, until I realized that I probably would make a very mediocre scientist, was to be a felid zoologist, to be studying big cats in the field. Fortunately, because of the way that my career turned out, I found myself in 2004 with the resources to be able to go back to my first love and to provide the capital, long-term capital, to those who were indeed great scientists, and more than that, those who'd proven that they could apply science in effective outcomes in being able to save cats. So, sort of a virtuous circle. I was able to fulfill myself by being able to fulfill their dreams, because cat conservation, indeed all wildlife conservation, is dramatically underfunded. So when my wife and I joined with Alan Rabinowitz, who I like to say is the person or the man that I would like to have been if I were a better and less acquisitive person, the idea was to be able to make him effective, to make his dreams come true by making mine come true. The idea of creating a new wildlife conservation organization was not even on the horizon. My aim was very simple. I wanted to be able to enable those organizations who had boots on the ground and to go from piecemeal conservation to a Manhattan Project for cats. I wanted to be the funder. And my thought was, that's where it ended. I didn't even feel I needed to be on the board of directors. It wasn't about that. Unfortunately, very early on, I discovered that any illusions that I have about many wildlife organizations, big ones particularly, were naive. And so it really came down to a question which my wife asked me, which was, well, if it doesn't exist, should you be creating it? And so we did. And I'm very happy to say that after kicking off in 2006 and going fully operational in 2008, Panthera is now the leading NGO focused entirely on big cat conservation. I've called up the image of the lion because it would be so much easier for me to call up the image of the tiger. The tiger is ubiquitous in the marketing of most of the big NGOs. But the lion is telling a very interesting story, and the lion, in a way, dovetails, I think, beautifully with the other panelists' focus on elephant. Let's start with the tiger, actually, because the tiger gives you the true picture of what's happened to a species that is the object of the kind of apocalypse that's taking place now in elephants. At the turn of the last century, there were probably 100,000 tigers in the wild. Now, maybe 3,500, half of which, if not more, are located in India. This is where the elephant is going to go. unless all of you can mobilize your passion and your resources to be able to stop that from happening. In other words, if you want to see where the elephant's going, take a look at the tiger. That's why I'm not using it as the easy get from capturing your attention. Any opinion poll which we've ever commissioned has shown that the two most empathetic images that appeal to people in terms of terrestrial animals are the elephant and the tiger. The tiger is on the verge of being functionally extinct, and the elephant will be without the efforts of people like yourselves to be able to stop that. The lion is an interesting case, and the reason is most people don't understand how precarious the position is for lions. 100 years ago, there were 200,000 of them. Today, there were fewer than 30,000 of them, 40% of which are located in a country that David was referring to, Tanzania, as being extremely corrupt and unreliable in terms of conservation. Now, putting that aside, we've seen all throughout Northern Africa and in the Middle East, countries that were once considered stable, they've gone pear-shaped. If lions were to lose Tanzania as their main stronghold, you would all be referring to lions as a critically endangered species. As it happens, one of the studies that we funded was to try to ground truth reports that we had in West Africa that there were 21 places where there were enough lions to be considered a critical mass. By the time we reported those findings last year, we found out that in the entirety of West Africa, this enormous landmass, there are only 4 areas where lions still exist. Actually, 1 has just resurfaced in the last month in Gabon. And in only 1 of those 4 places are there more than 50 lions. Lions are now extinct from 27 countries in Africa that they used to exist in. There are only 6 in which there are over 1,000, and as I said, Tanzania is ground zero. So when we look at cat conservation, I want you to be able to look past the image, because anyone who goes on a safari will see lions, and that's because lions are more social. They allow themselves to be seen, but without intervention, they will go the way of the tiger. If I, slide number 2, please. Very simply put, why cats, in answer to your question? Whenever you are preserving the apex predator, or to the less squeamish, the umbrella species in an ecosystem, you're achieving one-stop shopping in wildlife conservation. Tigers, lions, snow leopards need 2 things in order to be able to flourish: lots of land in which to roam and plenty of protein from which they can forage. By definition, if they have both of those items, you will have a flourishing cat habitat. Yet by definition, you'll also have a flourishing ecosystem. In Brazil, for example, where we have done monumental jaguar work, by saving the jaguars, the apex predator, we are dealing with 700 species of birds that are also encompassed within that effort. Canids, maned wolves, mountain lions, all kinds of other mammals, ungulates, and reptiles. Basically, with big cats, you are able to effect landscape-wide conservation. The big cats live on 5 out of 7 of the world's continents. They roam over 1/3 of the land mass of the world. By being able to utilize the hook that they provide for landscape-wide conservation, they're an extremely valuable tool. 3rd slide. I'm putting this one up because although we have the only range-wide leopard program, this is an unusual story. A few years ago, it came to our attention that one of the fastest-growing religious movements in South Africa, the Shembe Baptist Nazareth Church, already 4 million strong, had gone from only allowing leopards to be used by their elders to saying anyone in the tribe could use it. Problem, there are only 5,000 leopards in Africa, in South Africa. When we did the census, we found out that already, as a consequence of that new rule, 1,000 leopards had been killed. Not just acting as scientists and biologists, we applied our knowledge of leopard conservation and went to the leaders of the church and showed them that the great sucking sound of the animal that they so revered was coming from them. To their credit, they were shocked and they were horrified, and they said, "We will work with you." And so we created faux fur. We created a leopard cape, which you're seeing, which is more durable, far less expensive, and perfectly satisfactory to the tribespeople. There are now 8,000 of these which are being worn. Ironically enough, in an area which is not simply biologists going around and tracking cats, but in applied conservation, this one program alone probably saved more cats than any other single conservation program in wildcat conservation anywhere in the world. If I'd like to conclude on slide 4. This is my dream. On June 1st of last year in Abu Dhabi, we signed what we call the Global Alliance for Wildcats. The people that you see here, starting from the left, are Hemendra Kotari, the chairman of DSP BlackRock in India, already a passionate tiger conservationist, yours truly. The environment minister for Abu Dhabi, the head of their environmental agency, Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak Al Khalifa, representing the Gulf, and Joe Lowe from the Jinwell Foundation out of Hong Kong. For the first time ever, some people would say almost for the first time ever in any endeavor, we had Indians, Chinese, Gulf Arabs, American Jews sitting down at the same table, each one of us committing $20 million over 10 years to cat conservation. More than anything else, this epitomized what I hope will be a new template for environmental philanthropy, be it for leopards, and I'm trying to work with people who are engaged with leopards to be able to create this kind of alliance. We need people who have the passion and have the resources to step up and say, you know something, we can do this now. And I can assure you, I did not set about to become the king of cats. I thought as soon as we created it, everyone would come. They didn't. It took longer. It took many, many, many tens of millions of dollars. But what we've seen with the Global Alliance, with these 4 initial members of what we hope will be 10 groups or institutions putting in $200 million, I hope we'll be able to represent a path forward, not just for cat conservation, for which we think it's already a game changer, but also for other species like elephants, for which all of you should find a way to be engaged and mobilizing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So, thank you for your work. So we've talked about things that take incredible amounts of resources: land conservation, land purchases, weapons purchases, helicopter purchases. You started to tap into that curbing the demand, so curbing the cause. And I'm curious, on the ivory side, before we jump over to Philippe to broaden this conversation out to public engagement, on the ivory side, looking at the demand. So is there a way to shift that cultural demand for ivory? I'm curious about how the organizations with whom you're working, the efforts that you're taking, are you seeing that that's possible? I know we've seen some great inroads on shark fin soup in China through the cultural changes with some of the advertising campaigns there that have worked to start to shift that. What about ivory? Have you all looked at that?
Yeah, I mean, just to briefly touch on that, I think that the challenge is so enormous and the ticking clock is so loud. We have to address the issue at every point along the chain from supply to demand. The challenge with demand is there's an enormous inertia around that. And so I don't know if just addressing demand is going to get us there in time before the elephants are gone. That is a big question. I applaud those groups and those organizations that are taking an aggressive stance and trying to tell people. I think the story of the human toll of ivory trafficking and the national security and international security side of the story is significant. But you know, wildlife trafficking is one of the largest illicit economies in the world. I think it's the #4 illicit economy in the world. Ivory alone, I think, is about $1 billion a year. That means that there are major organizations involved in this. It's highly, it's criminalized and vertically integrated. It's nesting within legitimate trade in terms of the supply chains. The same ships that are bringing legitimate business are going out and there are secret stashes and caches of ivory and other kinds of wildlife hidden within those. That needs to be addressed as well. When you're talking about $1 billion in illicit money flows, that's running through our international financial markets. That also needs to be addressed. Those assets need to be tracked. Those beneficiaries and profiteers and orchestrators need to be held accountable. And again, on the ground, David's work is incredible. African parks, we work with African parks as well. They are fantastic and they need more resources. That is a critical point where we can have immediate impacts right now.
So, there is no way that the demand side will be covered rapidly enough to prevent extinction of elephants. You have to deal with the poaching itself with a separate program to deal with the Chinese government, who is mainly responsible for this. I mean, we had this scandal where the president of China visited Kenya, meets with the president, and his ambassador is caught smuggling out ivory on the government plane.
Yeah.
That's the kind of stuff. The other thing is that until recently, governments have not awoken to the fact that this is a big illegal market which is fueling terrorism. Right. So Interpol, which is the international police organization, has programs funded by its member states against the first three of those. The number of dollars that they have focused on the wildlife trade is zero. They have no programs, not one. So it's only as people are beginning to believe and understand that guys like Shabab, guys like John Jaweed, guys like the Lord's Resistance Army fund themselves from ivory sales. Now they're starting to get interested because of the security aspects. Mm-hmm. Nobody's interested, or historically nobody's been interested in the wildlife aspects. Right. But again, governments move too slowly, which is why there's so much room for private philanthropy here. Yep. And even so, it takes a long time to get permits to import guns. It takes a while to get import licenses for helicopters in places like Mozambique. Mm-hmm. So you have to work with what you can. And going back to the point that Tom was making, a lot of these major funds, and I'll name here the World Wildlife Fund, because I resigned from their board because I thought they were so ineffectual. There are a lot of these organizations are really very good at raising money, but in the field you don't see any results. And you just have to be willing to take a hard line. And there's literally about a half a dozen foundations or individuals who are funding all the anti-poaching stuff that there is in Africa. And there's literally 3 or 4 organizations that have manpower on the ground. And some of the most effective are freelance ex-Israeli commandos, of whom there are 3 or 4, Tom knows them, I know them, who are very effective in persuading governments that if they don't want to see the other side of the commandos, they should do something good soon. So this is an area which requires drastic action in ways which traditional NGOs are pretty uncomfortable with. Right. Yeah. You don't see the Gates Foundation buying machine guns for people. Right. But that's what you have to do here.
Yeah, you do. And this is the kind of audience, the kind of participants who are looking for that strategic intervention. And people are used to taking risk in their business lives. And we need to be taking risks right now. It's too urgent. So Philippe, as far as changing cultural values, engaging people, connecting them to nature. I mean, saying that Interpol, they don't care about the wildlife trade, they care about the terrorism piece. How do we get people more engaged to actually care about this?
Well, thank you, Amy. Thank you to the panel. I mean, what an honor to be here to participate in this prestigious panel. I'm humbled. I just want to touch on something. I apologize.
I should have said grandson of the great Jacques Cousteau, son of Philippe Cousteau Sr., and lifelong environmentalist dedicated to this issue for your entire career. So thank you.
Amy, thank you. I want to touch on something that Tom said earlier. I think it was slide number 2 about why big cats. And then I want to kind of very briefly take it to the bigger picture. Apex predator secure whole ecosystems. We were just in Nepal actually 2 weeks ago doing some work looking at what communities and interaction around Bardia National Park and what's happening down there with the tigers and how the human sustainability, environmental sustainability is being combined. But what we're talking about is a systems understanding, fundamental systems understanding when we talk about big cats and the importance of that kind of conservation. And I'm still disappointed when I walk around in the public and talk to people about these issues, the lack of real understanding of that fact. I'll give a great example. Try and pay attention to popular culture and conservation in popular culture. And Jeremy Clarkson, the now former host of I think it was Top Gear, I was reading one of his blogs, and he wrote, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically said, if I have to choose between some animal in some far-off place that I've never heard of and I'm never going to see in my Lamborghini, I'm not against conservation, but I'm going to pick my Lamborghini. And I think that that demonstrates one of the big fundamental challenges of public understanding here. When we talk about Interpol or we talk about any of these kinds of institutions, or the folks at the State Department that I know we've all talked to, or Homeland Security, about how important conservation and the intersections between terrorism and slavery, et cetera, is. You look at people in popular culture, and there's still a lack of understanding of how these systems work and why conservation is important and why it affects us when you're talking about climate change, protecting big cats, whatever it is. And so our work is really fundamentally, how do we connect the dots and help people connect the dots? And that's, I think, a big challenge that we still face. David, as you pointed out, there's only half dozen or so foundations that are really supporting this kind of work. There's a lot of money out there. There should be a lot more. And yet people connecting the dots is still a big challenge. And so we work in education. My grandfather always told me, you know, the key to social movements and the most powerful players in our communities are young people. I mean, they drive popular culture. You know, Madison Avenue's known this for a long time. Market to kids, because not because they're going to make this buying decisions and consumer and cultural decisions in 10 or 15, 20 years, but because they make them now and because they influence adults and parents to make those choices now. And that cascades down politically, economically, et cetera. We have a friend of mine was talking about, you know, we don't have a scientific problem. We don't have a technological problem to a lot of these issues. We have a political problem. And I would argue, thus, we have a constituent problem. And if we don't focus and invest, Tom, you mentioned one of the many shortfalls of many of the big NGOs out there. I think one of them is that the modern environmental movement invests very little in education, invests very little in helping to move the needle so that people and voters and constituents, we're growing the audience of people that care about these issues, that connect the dots. So we don't need to be on this panel because everybody in this entire conference understands the importance, because 1,000 foundations are investing in this kind of work, because government institutions are recognizing the connections between security and conservation. And so I think that one of the other challenges, the other end, the real supply end of this, or the demand side of this, is really investing in education in a much more effective and concerted way, in systems learning in our schools. I mean, it goes down to what we're teaching kids in our schools. We're not teaching systems learning. They don't understand how to connect the dots. And when we talk about climate change and cats and all these other issues, you know, people can watch the news and see Donald Trump open the window and say, hey, this is the coldest day I remember in my memory in New York. Well, the weather outside his window in New York does not climate make. But this direct kind of linear thinking is a big problem that we face, and we need to start training our society to think through these complex systems and to connect the dots in ways so that this kind of important work can have much more support and is not being ignored on an international level by the Interpols and the others.
So what is Earth Echo doing to engage kids in this area?
So we are one of the leading youth environmental education groups in the country, and we really focus on helping to provide compelling educational resources to support educators and science teachers in the classroom, to help provide systems education, and we provide a lot of resources that connect young people into their communities, because, you know, one of the fundamental truths about the human brain is awareness doesn't lead to action. Action leads to awareness. And so what we all have to do is find ways to encourage ourselves to get engaged through baby steps into a community. It doesn't happen overnight. Tom, your journey has been since, what, 2008? You thought it would happen a lot faster, and yet the work and the learning and by investing your time and your effort in that, it's ballooned into something much bigger than you ever anticipated. And I think that we, you know, the work that we do with schools and teachers and school districts around the country and around the world is really helping young people connect the dots in the classroom and then go out into their communities, take action, and then they have ownership for these issues, and then you can move them up that value change. And you can also understand that young people have huge influence on adults. I always like to tell people, and I'll finish on this, when you go to the supermarket, there is a reason that there's a cartoon on cereal boxes, and the cereal boxes are at eye level of a 10-year-old. Not because they want us to buy them, but because we want our kids to influence us to buy them. And when you look at political decisions, tremendous influence on political decisions, hundreds of billions of dollars children under 18 command every year. You're talking a lot of power and influence that young people have today to make change. And so that's really what our focus is.
Definitely speaking my passion. My mother's an environmental educator, so since before I was in her jerry pack in a nature sanctuary, I've been a big fan of it. And we were talking earlier about tracking. My mom's a nature tracker in the snow in the wintertime in Idaho, and it's pretty fun. You get those kids out there and they have passion, and then they say to their mom, why aren't we recycling? And then they yell at the teacher, why are you telling me how to live my life?
Power of the nag, I like to call it.
The power of the nag, exactly. Kids are incredibly powerful advocates. I wanted to open it up to the audience for questions. Yes. Oh, and then we'll come forward.
Thanks everybody for talking about this topic. I wanted to ask you, I know it's different cases, the cats and the elephants. What are some of the solutions which we might have to consider taking, which none of us want to take? So, for example, with elephants, would we have to move to a world where, like we've done with rhinos, maybe just start cutting off the ivory to make these animals less attractive to them to be killed? And on the cats issue, it's more of a land issue, right? And as their economies grow, what can we do to make it worthwhile for these people to be involved in preserving these animals? But the answers to not what we're doing, if we start losing this war, where do we go?
Well, one thing you won't do is cut off the elephant's tusks, because they're an integral part of the animal as to how it uses to root and for fibers and so forth. This is like saying, we have a problem with paraplegics, we'll take people's arms off and send them on their way. You can't do that. I'm no expert in cats, Tom can speak to that. But what you have to do is protect the entire animal, I'm afraid.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the short answer to the question is we have to engage with people. And it seems rather trite, but about 90% of our work, one way or the other, is dealing with people. Let me give you the example of the Jaguar Corridor, because you asked how can you reconcile human growth and development with conservation. The jaguar occurs from northern Mexico all the way down to northern Argentina. It's over a dozen countries. My colleague, Alan Rabinowitz, created a landmark program which, according to National Geographic, is amongst the most ambitious carnivore conservation programs ever created. Because what it entails is a genetic landscape corridor which, as a consequence of the science that we've been able to accumulate, takes the jaguar all the way down from Mexico through to the southern part of its range. Now, this is significant. Unlike lions, unlike tigers, unlike clouded leopards and other big cats, there's no genetic differentiation that we're aware of between a jaguar in Sonora and a jaguar in Salta and Jujuy province in Argentina. What that means is, every once in a while, jaguars are crossing the Panama Canal. They have the ability to have genetic connectivity. So what we've done is we've taken the science, and being able to have that as proof, we've gone to each country. Last week, we had a monumental breakthrough. Mexico joined the Jaguar Corridor. But from Mexico, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, every single country in Central America is participating in this program. Maybe one or two are just waiting to have them signed. And we're going from country to country because we can show through the landscape how the jaguars are navigating. Now, the practical application of this is that this informs the public and governmental debate so that when they develop, they can proactively take into account what needs to be done in order to allow cats to move through the landscape, even very, very close to human landscapes. So in industries, even mining, the footprint is actually very small. The problem comes when you go back and try to put the clock back. If you deal with embedding conservation within development proactively, it can work in the case of the apex predators. They're extremely adaptable in that respect. And so we work from the government level with heads of state and heads of environment all the way down to local people. In Brazil, for example, in order to win the hearts and minds of the people who, in the Pantanal, for example, viewed the jaguar as being a competitor because occasionally it takes down livestock, we built schools. These people were illiterate. During the day, their kids learned how to read. During the evening, their parents learned how to read. And the other ranchers in the area would send their kids to these schools or their people's kids to these schools. So they had schools. We would bring doctors down from New York who would give them medicine that they never would have had exposure to. If there's one thing that unites people all over the world, whether it's Jews, Muslims, rich, poor, everybody wants a better life for their children. You win that, and one thing we know, a jaguar might get into that land, he ain't getting out, because he's now viewed as their children's ticket to a better life. So for us, it's all about looking at partnerships. We're now in over 40 countries. We have 78 different in situ partnerships because we're looking for people in those communities, in those countries themselves, who are going to apply conservation. We want more boots on the ground, but you've got to have local buy-in. You can't be telling them, you need to do this and suffer for it. We have to show how we can integrate that at the national level, all the way right down to the nursery school level. And it can be done.
Absolutely. By far the most successful conservation programs I've seen, from Sumatra to, which is having a lot of problems, but in some communities where they've been successful, to Nepal, to Latin America. I've been to the Pantanal, all these places. There's definitely that connection with the community. You cannot have environmental sustainability without human sustainability. It's impossible, and particularly young people, and education is so powerful.
Yes.
I wanted to focus a little bit more on the demand side of this equation, because you have, the parallels to me to the drug war are overwhelming, and you have terrorist organizations where even if the price of ivory were to double or triple, get so much of their money from from procuring these goods. And so just like in the drug war, you can put more helicopters, they will get more helicopters, better helicopters, etc. Appreciating the time limitations, what pressures can be applied? Because if the demand equation doesn't go down, I find it to be difficult to believe that these organizations won't figure out ways to continue doing what they're doing.
So the ultimate answer is dealing with the Chinese government. There are a few organizations that are doing that with not much success in mammals just yet. They have made some impact on shark's fin, as our moderator referred to before. The Chinese government, as you know, banned shark's fin from government dishes, which has had a huge impact. It's going to take action with the Chinese government. And one of the problems is it's not high on anybody's list. When Mr. Obama and Mr. Xi sit down together, cats are not on their list, elephants are not on their list. Warships maneuvering in the Taiwan Channel are. So the question is, can you get this elevated in a way to make any difference? Hopefully over time you will, but there isn't much time, so you have to do that in parallel and hope you make some results. As for the futility of things otherwise, this is a short-term war, which is to say, if you can make the procurement of ivory difficult enough, it will slow down, if not cease. There are countries where the borders are effectively unpoliced, where there is no penalty for disobeying the laws, and where the laws are written. I mean, in some of these countries, the maximum penalty for illegal killing an elephant, taking the ivory, is $250. Well, that is not exactly a deterrent. So you've got to get the governments to have real deterrence. Some governments have. And I think there's a couple of countries, particularly Chad and to some extent Congo-Brazzaville, where the presidents, in neither case are these guys great Democrats. But they've taken a personal interest. And the reason that Chad has been so successful is that the ruler of Chad had basically said, we're not losing any more elephants, send it in the army. And he persuaded the EU to pay for it. We bridged it so that they wouldn't have to wait for the EU monies to come in. And they stopped it. It can be done. You just have to be willing to be very resilient and very tough-minded about it. President Sasso in Congo-Brazzaville also has a personal interest. They haven't been quite as effective as the Chadians, but then again, they're probably not as, they're a little more of a democracy, which has its drawbacks in this context. But you've seen some major things happen there where the government, after some years, with the president's direction, they brought in our African Parks Network to run the parks, and guess what? They managed to stop most of the poaching. It can be done, but it takes a bunch of hard asses backed by a government.
And I would just add that, you know, having people come into this space with innovative ideas, like the faux leopard skin, you know, that's brilliant, and it can have game-changing effects in certain cases. But as David was saying, we really know what is working. And in some cases, we just need to double down on it. We need to triple down on it. And that shows real promise. There's real traction there. And we can change this situation, especially in the ivory realm. And then one more note, just in terms of public awareness. And I want to, again, say, you know, I really think the work of Catherine and people who can really tell a story is going to be critically important in this. Not as much, maybe, in terms of changing the demand end, but in terms of creating the political will that's necessary to bring this to the level of real geopolitics. Bring it up to the top of the mattering map. And yes, when the President of the United States sits down with, you know, the leaders in China and talks about what are the most critical issues at hand, if we can get that somewhere on the list, even if it's the last thing, that's something that a broad public can engage and push for, and we can create that political will. And again, Philippe, yes, the youth and the Enough Project works a lot with, especially with college campuses, to build awareness around the issues of our concern. There is an enormous desire and power and energy that can be harnessed. And I think that work also needs to have that double down and triple down. So thank you for that work.
Yes. Yes. Rebecca?
Thank you.
There's a mic coming.
This session's over.
One more. 3 minutes, no?
Uh-oh.
Thank you so much for everything. Catherine, my question is for you. When you were talking about the jewelry district in New York, you made reference to the phrase illegal ivory, implying there is legal ivory, and if so, what makes that?
Well, it's a little complicated. There are these, I guess, I'm not sure if it's 1920, ivory that has been carved before a particular period. In other words, it's sort of grandfathered into your estate. You can get, but the documents many times are forged to prove that it's legal. Like at various auction houses at Sotheby's and Christie's, they'll sell ivory technically that's legal. But unless you have a pocket-sized carbon dating system, you really don't know. Is it really from the 20s, or is it two days ago, coated in tea? But I mean, to make it look old. So that's part of why New York is a big market, because there's a lot of resale going on there. But just quickly to this other comment, how can we activate? I mean, looking at the Invisible Children campaign as a sort of model, I think a great model. That was a campaign started on the website, grassroots, and it really gained momentum and noise to the extent that the constituents within many different states, I guess, talking to their respective politicians, and the politicians then putting some influence onto the military. That it resulted in a $450 million campaign to try to get Joseph Kony, which I think they're seconds away from achieving. And my hope would be, because we have no time, because as David said, it's a war, we really do have 5 minutes. If there's a way to kind of transition that Invisible Children campaign into, it's basically an anti-poaching, but it's also an anti-terrorist campaign. And I think when people start to look at the human factor in it, I believe that the degree of urgency is just, grows exponentially.
Absolutely.
And I just want to say one real quick thing. 97% decline in tigers correlates to a 97% decline in tiger habitat. And exactly. Over the last 100 years. And so when we talk about public pressure, communications, I'm also a filmmaker and work in television as well, and the power of that medium. If anybody saw the Dorito commercial that came out around the Super Bowl, pressuring Frito-Lay to stop using palm oil and live up to a commitment that they made a long time ago. You should Google the Dorito commercial. It's brilliant. It was done by NGOs. It's kind of a spoof on Dorito commercials. Please watch it. And it had a huge influence. It had more views than all Dorito commercials combined in the past. And one of the big problems in places like Indonesia and Sumatra is palm oil plantations. And so, we're also looking at a conservation issue around not just poaching, but also habitat loss. That's really, really important and a big problem. 150 companies, this is really relevant here to Milken. 150 corporations roughly control about 80% of the world's commerce, so directly or indirectly. So, we as big corporations and influencers, we need to make better choices in where we source our materials, what choices we make and what we buy. I mean, palm oil is a big problem where a lot of tigers are dying, a lot of orangutangs, a lot of rhinos, a lot of elephants are dying because we're losing habitat as well, in also places like Nepal and India and others. So I just wanted to kind of throw in a piece about commerce here and corporations and businesses and influencers. We have a big influence on that too, to try and curb habitat loss, which is another really, really big problem when we're talking about these kinds of animals as indicators of health of ecosystems.
Absolutely. The Consumer Goods Forum, which is made up of a lot of these large corporations, came together with Greenpeace to make a commitment on the anti-deforestation piece driven by commodities trade. So you're seeing some of those companies taking a leadership position. I think what we've seen across here is we need to raise the awareness, inspire people to want to act, and then they need to be informed into how to make that action. So whether it's the chips that they buy, making sure that they're, or the chocolate bar, it doesn't have palm oil in it, to the investment that you can make in philanthropy. The folks on this stage have done the deep, hard work to identify where are those interventions where you can put your philanthropic dollars to work and make an impact. And it's very important to find out who are the effective organizations doing that work. Yesterday, the panel that Adrian Grenier was on, he talked about doing his own homework to get deep into not the organizations with the great marketing budgets, but the ones who are really doing the effective work on the ground. So talk to people you trust and make the investment accordingly. And please join me in thanking our panel for today's conversation. Thank you. Thank you for your work.